August 28, 1990. This was just another ordinary day in Plainfield. And then, without warning, within seconds,
complex, Cedar Hill, I believe, that also took a heavy hit. And in each of those, there were some fatalities, up to 9 now. But the chief of the Plainfield Police Department says that they haven't even gotten in.
people are trapped with nowhere to run. Illinois wasn't exactly a stranger to violent tornadoes. In fact, the state had seen plenty before 1990. Back in March 1925, the deadliest tornado in American history, the Tri-State Tornado, had torn through southern Illinois, killing 695 people across 3 states. But the thing that made Plainfield different was that since records began in the 1950s, no tornado stronger than F3 had ever touched down in Illinois during the month of August. August tornadoes just weren't supposed to be violent. Most infamous Chicago area tornado before Plainfield was the 1967 Oak Lawn F4, which killed 33 people and injured 500 on April 21st. Spring tornadoes, yes, but deadly summer ones, very rare. So when the 28th of August, 1990 arrived with temperatures in the low 90s and oppressive humidity, meteorologists knew severe weather was possible, but a violent F5 tornado seemed almost impossible. The atmosphere, however, had other plans. That day started like any postcard Tuesday, with people going about their routines completely unaware it would soon become extraordinary. The National Weather Service had previously predicted sunny skies, but unexpectedly, temperatures had suddenly climbed into the low 90s, which was suspiciously higher than usual. This wasn't supposed to happen because it became about 11 degrees warmer than normal for late August. This meant that the atmosphere was quietly accumulating a tremendous amount of energy, more than double what meteorologists typically classify as extreme. At the same time, a subtle weather disturbance drifted across the Great Lakes, and a cold front pushed in from the west, slicing into the warm, heavy air below. No one realized what that combination truly meant. Put together, it was one of those rare moments when the sky practically dares tornadoes to form. However, one key ingredient for tornado formation was missing: strong low-level wind shear. By mid-afternoon, that changed. But green skies don't always mean tornadoes, and nobody was warning them otherwise. 12 p.m. The supercell had initially formed near Janesville in south-central Wisconsin shortly after noon, and at first it seemed like just another severe thunderstorm. But this was becoming different because the storm was organizing, rotating, and feeding on unstable air. 1:42 p.m., now intensifying, the storm produced its first tornado sighting near Pecatonica, Illinois, about 15 miles west of Rockford. And this was captured by a news crew, but the storm funnel didn't last very long. Still, it was a warning sign. The supercell still kept moving southeast, growing stronger with every mile. At 2:32 p.m., warnings should have gone out much earlier, but they were issued only an hour later, and everyone had the same question. Why so late? Delays like this were almost unheard of, and the truth behind it was even more disturbing. At the NWS office in Rosemont, meteorologists were drowning in workload. It was the only station covering all of Illinois, and that day it was stretched past its limits. Worse still, their Doppler upgrade, the one system that could have given them clearer eyes on the storm, had been knocked out weeks earlier by a lightning strike. In other words, they were flying blind. 2:45 p.m. That tornado didn't last very long, but the supercell storm itself wasn't fading away anytime soon. According to the NWS, the same supercell was still rotating hard as it moved southeast, the kind of storm that had already produced an F5 tornado with winds well over 260 miles per hour and a path almost half a mile wide. So by the time it approached the cab, radar was still showing that tight hook echo signature and hail the size of golf balls up to 2 inches wide was falling. So a Northern Illinois University employee, Jay Orbick, climbed up on top of Husky Stadium with his camera. He found himself filming something completely unusual for his region. Jay never saw the tornado, but the storm he was filming already had all the ingredients to brew even more trouble. 3:15 p.m. The supercell storm continued southeast and hidden. But at that time in Plainfield High School, preparations were underway for its first day. Coach Wayne the Sutter had 107 football players on the field doing their workout. And inside the gym, the girls' volleyball team was setting up for their home opener. Nobody had heard a siren because, as you might have guessed, there was no warning. Around the same time, northeast of the school, near Oswego, the storm touched down in Kendall County, producing F1 and F2 damage for the first 4 miles across rural farmland, snapping cornstalks, tossing tractors, and shredding barns that had stood for generations. Everything had become a blur, and farmers could only watch as the storm carved its path. For the next 5 minutes, it would only get worse. It had become a full-blown tornado. 3:20 p.m. The tornado, now intensified to F3, reached the Wheatland Plain subdivision and damaged nearly every home in the area. 12 homes were completely destroyed, and some were trapped in the rubble. One of them, a child, was airlifted to Loyola University Hospital in Maywood, but later died of injuries. Past the subdivision, it had now reached F5 intensity, and clearly one could see narrow swaths of extreme ground scouring where mature corn crops were completely stripped from the ground, leaving nothing but bare soil behind. And as it approached Plainfield, it destroyed 2 large steel electric transmission towers and damaged others. Towers built to withstand 120 miles per hour winds, twisted like pipe cleaners. The monster was now moving at roughly 50 miles per hour, carrying winds between 260 and 320 miles per hour. And still, Plainfield heard nothing. 3:23 p.m. By now, a second severe thunderstorm warning was issued from the NWS, but the warning didn't provide any indication that a tornado was already on the ground, and didn't mention the path the storm had carved through the area. 3:25 p.m. Moments later, the tornado crossed Highway 30, grabbing a 20-ton tractor trailer, hurling it more than half a mile from the road, killing the driver. 3 other motorists were also killed as their vehicles were thrown from the highway. The F5, now at peak intensity, was heading straight for Plainfield and nearby towns, unstoppable and terrifying, leaving nothing in its path untouched. 3:27 p.m. The sky had an eerie look, the kind that whispers, "Something is wrong." When Coach Wayne Dutter spotted unusual activity above the school and decided to act early, he couldn't have imagined what was about to unfold. Wayne hurried the players off the field and got them inside the smaller gym. In the larger gym, the assistant volleyball coach yelled at them to get out as they were just minutes away from their home opener. It was just in time before things became worse. The girls rushed towards the nearest door, joining the football players in an interior hallway. Then they knelt against the wall. It was reported that as soon as the last player was through the door, the coach shut it, but it was immediately ripped back open by strong winds from the storm. It was chaos as heavy winds tried to take as many lives as possible as it passed. Amidst the winds, the gymnasium proceeded to fall apart and crash down. It was then that their world exploded. 3:28 p.m. The building trembled. Some students began crying. Some football players had the presence of mind to put their helmets on, but the roar was deafening, just like standing inside a jet engine. They were left in the rubble, and then silence. Once the tornado had passed, that hallway was the only hallway left standing in the entire building. They did head counts for every athlete, every coach, and surprisingly like a miracle. Considering the scale and magnitude of destruction that had hit the building, over 150 student-athletes survived with about a dozen coaches all accounted for. According to class, if there had been one more kid in that gym, they would have never got them out. However, that would have been impossible without Coach Wayne's timely and decisive action. Had he waited 5 minutes, many of those players might have died. Journalist Neil Steinberg would later write, "Still, the grim truth was that 3 lives could not be saved inside the school. Stephen Hunt, a 43-year-old science teacher, plus 2 maintenance workers. Hunt had been talking with fellow teacher Linda Kinnikin only minutes before the tornado hit. When it struck, the wind grabbed a semi-trail from the parking lot and dropped it onto the 2nd floor of the science department. His car was gone. The wind was so strong, it took it half a mile away. We thought he went home. Little did we know that they found his body under the wall," said Dave Ross, assistant football coach. 3:29 p.m., downtown Plainfield. Downtown, the tornado tore through the heart of the village, demolishing the Plainfield School District Administration building, where the wife of a custodian was killed. According to reports, she died when the building collapsed under the tornado's force. From there, it crossed Route 59 and ripped into St. Mary Immaculate Church and School, claiming 3 more lives: the principal of the school, a music teacher, and the son of the cook of the rectory. Mayor John Argadelis would later recall that he still remembered the silver cross hanging down at St. Mary's as if suspended by a thread. 55 homes were destroyed in Plainfield. Some were swept completely away. Even gravestones in the nearby cemetery were toppled. 3:33 p.m., the tornado roared southeast with unbelievable power. At its strongest, it was still an F5 with winds fast enough to level hundreds of well-built homes. By the time it hit neighborhoods like Crystal Lawns, Lily Cash, Peerless Estates, and Warwick, it had weakened a bit to F3, but it was still deadly. Some people described it as a massive spinning wall of wind and debris, ripping trees from the ground and throwing cars around. Even with the drop in strength, 5 more people died. 2 in Crystal Lawns, 1 in Lily Cash, and 2 in Warwick. It was pure chaos. 3:38 p.m., Crest Hill Lakes Apartments. The tornado ripped through the Crest Hill Lakes apartment complex, where it caused F3 damage and claimed 8 more lives. 2 of those were 17-year-old Letitia Herod and her 5-week-old daughter Titania Brown, who lived in an apartment building in the area when the tornado hit. Their home was destroyed, and later their bodies were found in a field across the street. Her mother, Justina Page, could hardly believe it. Her father, William Herod, was left with grief that words couldn't capture. 12-year-old Jimmy-O woke up in a cornfield near his 4-year-old sister, Lisi, after the tornado destroyed their Crest apartment. His mother, Vicky, and older brother, thus 14, were killed in the storm. Jim tried to reach his sister, but the devastation was overwhelming. The Agitio family lost more members than anyone else at the Crest Hill Lakes complex. Raised by his father, Jim has since built a life, but he still remembers that day vividly. Every loss, he said, counted, and that no family's grief can be measured. And as the tornado pushed out of Crest Hill and into Joliet, surveys showed that it was starting to weaken from F3 to F2, but it was still violent enough to take 3 more lives. Even areas that didn't lose anyone, like the Bridal Wealth neighborhood, were still left shaken with homes damaged and entire streets torn up. Still, the storm kept fading as it moved farther east through Joliet, moving between F2 and F1 before eventually lifting near Woodland Avenue in Campbell Street around 3:45 p.m., ending a path of destruction that had only lasted about half an hour, but changed the region forever. 8 families, all gone in seconds. 3:45 p.m. As the dust settled, the full weight of the destruction became painfully clear, and those survivors could only watch when the tornado finally lifted a few minutes later. So when journalist Neil Steinberg had driven across the Wabash Avenue Bridge and looked right, he had seen what looked like an ugly bruise made of clouds. The people in Plainfield were in shock. There was no warning. It looked like a war zone. And the numbers told part of the story. 16 miles of devastation, 29 dead, 353 injured, 470 homes destroyed, over 1,000 homes damaged, with more than $165 million in damages. But the numbers don't capture everything. Everyone knew someone that was gone or seriously injured. The community really came together. There was a shelter for people that lost their homes. The shelter was empty because everybody had someone that let them stay. After the 1990 tornado, the NWS reduced the Chicago office's workload by creating an office in Romeoville, Illinois in 1993, as well as in Lincoln, Illinois in 1995. NWS Chief Meteorologist Edward Fenlin explained that the state-of-the-art tornado warnings today was 13 minutes, and it was far better than it was in 1990 before they had Doppler radar technology. A permanent tornado Plainfield Victim Memorial stands in Plainfield, Illinois, where a dedication ceremony is held every year to remember those gone. 29 names, 29 lives that mattered. The Plainfield tornado remains the only F5 tornado ever documented in the United States during the month of August. According to some survivors of the event, they mention, "We react a little differently now. We pay attention. When I hear that siren, I'm heading for the basement." The tornado was invisible, but the scars it left will never fade. Trust the warnings. Know your shelter. And when the sky turns green, don't wait, because sometimes you won't get a second chance.